Chapter 12. Section 2, 7, Lower Chalk. Chapter 13, Section 2, 8, Upper or Flinty Chalk. These deposits form by far the most considerable and important divisions of the chalk formation, and constitute the most striking features of the geology of Sussex. As their investigation is highly interesting, we shall endeavor to elucidate by subjoining a brief notice of the course of the chalk through the southeastern part of England, and on the continent. We are informed by Mr. Townsend that the chalk hills are bounded by a line which stretches from southwest to northeast, and that within these limits they form three principal mountain ranges. The first, leaving Berks, runs north through Bucks, Bedfordshire, and Hertfordshire, into Cambridgeshire, by Dunstable, Hitching, Baldock, and Royston, to Gogmagog Hills, near Cambridge. The second, passing from Berkshire eastward, stretches through Surrey, where it forms the Hog's Back, that beautiful ridge which extends from Farnham to Guildford, and then appears at Box Hill. This branch forms the hilly country and the downs north of Reigate, Bletchingley, and Godstone. It enters Kent to the north of Westerham, and extends by Riverhead to Wrotham, south of Dartford, Rochester, Lenham, and Canterbury, to Folkestone and Dover. One division of this ridge is continued to the north coast of Kent, by Feversham, near Sheppey, Margate, and North Foreland to Ramsgate. The third range, leaving Wiltshire and Berkshire, enters Hants, and to the south passes round Petersfield, then, stretching to the east, forms a barrier against the sea along the coast from Chichester and the South Downs as far as Dover, and ranges from Mapledurham, Houghton, Steyning, and Lewes as far as Beachy Head. Insular parts occur in the Isle of Thanet and Isle of Wight. In France, the chalk prevails on the skirt of the western boundary of Mount Jura, extending nearly in a direction from southeast to northwest, and covering a space of at least 210 miles long and 50 broad. Chalk also occurs in Ireland, Saxony, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, and Poland. The thickness of the chalk formation varies considerably in different parts of its course. Near Royston it attains an elevation above the sea of 481 feet. South of Dunstable it is 994 feet. South of Shaftesbury, 941 feet. Between Lewes in Sussex and Alton in Hampshire, various parts of the range rise to the height of between 800 and 900 feet, and between Alton and Dover between 700 and 800 feet. In the Sussex range, Ditchling Beacon, which is the highest point, is 856 feet above the level of the sea. The mountain ranges formed by the chalk are characterized by their smooth and unbroken outline, and are generally covered with a short, verdant turf. The earlier inhabitants of this island, either from choice or necessity, fixed their settlements on the elevated ridges and platforms of this formation, and vestiges of their sepulchral mounts are still visible, scattered here and there over the downs. Stonehenge and other druidical temples are situated upon it, being composed of immense blocks of the siliceous sandstone that occurs in the form of boulders on various parts of its surface. The description of the South Downs inserted in a former part of this work will sufficiently explain the range and extent of the upper and lower chalk in the southeastern part of Sussex. Varying in altitude from 300 to upwards of 800 feet, this chain of hills extends from Beachy Head along the coast to Brighton, from whence it stretches through the centre of western Sussex into Hampshire. On the north it presents a precipitous escarpment to the Weald, but its southern side descends with a gentle slope, and on the southwest is lost beneath the beds of the Isle of Wight basin, while the southeastern part forms a line of chalk cliffs of considerable extent. The South Downs are intersected by 4 transverse valleys of considerable extent, through which the Arun, the Adur, the Ouse, and the Cuckmere flow from the interior of the country into the British Channel. The course of these rivers has already been described. The general dip or inclination of the strata of the Sussex Range is to the southeast. In a few instances, however, the influence of local causes has occasioned some exceptions. The summits of the hills are generally covered with a layer of loose flints, which lies immediately beneath the turf, and in some places beds of sand and clay with boulders of siliceous sandstone and breccia, and other accumulations of diluvial detritus, obtain a similar situation. In numerous places on the sides and at the base of the downs, quarries have been opened, and kilns erected for converting the chalk into lime, of which immense quantities are annually consumed by the Sussex agriculturalists. These partial sections in the interior, together with the line of coast from Brighton to Beachy Head, afford ample opportunities for the examination of the geological structure of this interesting chain. We now proceed to a more particular survey of the deposits included in the present section, but before entering on their investigation, it may be necessary to offer a few remarks upon the substance of which they are principally composed. Chalk is a mineral too well known to require description, and yet its characters are such as could not fail to excite attention, if less frequently presented to our notice. The Sussex chalk varies in color from pure white to a bluish gray, and differs considerably in its coherence and composition. It has an earthy fracture, is meager to the touch, and adheres to the tongue. It is dull, opaque, soft, and light, its specific gravity being about 2.3. It is composed of lime and carbonic acid, and contains an inconsiderable proportion of silex and iron. The harder varieties of this substance were formerly in great request for building, and when protected from the influence of the atmosphere by a thin casing of limestone or flint, proved very durable. The ruins of the Priory of St. Pancras, near Lewes, which have stood nearly 800 years, afford a remarkable instance of this kind. The interior of many of the walls are 6 feet thick, and are entirely formed of chalk, the outside having a facing of caen stone and squared flints. At present, chalk is seldom used in architecture, except in the construction of vaults, cellars, and other subterranean works. The Sussex chalk forms 2 principal divisions, namely the lower or hard chalk, which is destitute of flints, and the upper chalk, which contains numerous layers of siliceous nodules and veins of flint. As far as Beachy Head, Townsend's Moses, Volume 1, page 142. Insular parts occur in the Isle of Thanet and Isle of Wight. Smith's Strata. For a more particular account of the range and extent of the chalk formation, see Phillips' Geological Outlines, edition 1822, page 77. Chalk also occurs in Ireland, Saxony, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, and Poland. Dr. Berger, Geological Transactions, Volume 1, page 14. And between Alton and Dover, between 700 and 800 feet. Phillips' Outlines, 2nd edition, 1816. Are generally covered with a short verdant turf. In Champagne, in France, there are immense plains of chalk absolutely destitute of vegetation, except where patches of the calcaire grossier occur as islands, or oases in the midst of these deserts. Many parts of this tract have perhaps not been visited for ages by any living being, no motive existing that could induce anyone to wander there. This chalk is said to contain 11% of magnesia, to which the barrenness of the soil is supposed to be owing. Geological Transactions, Volume 2, page 175. Chalk. Various conjectures have been offered respecting the probable origin of chalk and the mode of its formation. Patrin, Dictionnaire d'Histoire Naturelle, Volume 5, page 472, suppose that it was the production of 3 different causes. 1. Animal earth, proceeding from the decomposition of organic bodies. 2. Calcareous lava injected by submarine volcanoes. 3. Detritus of calcareous mountains. Delametherie imagined it to have been deposited by water in a state of great agitation. Journal de Physique, Volume 80, page 37. In Ireland, the chalk acquires a degree of hardness equal to that of compact limestone. In its geological position and in the nature of its fossils, it corresponds, however, with that of England, with which it is considered to be entirely identified. In many places it is covered by basalt. It contains echinites, terebraculae, ammonites, and belemnites. Geological Transactions, Volume 3, pages 169-129. Contains numerous layers of siliceous nodules and veins of flint. In some parts of England, the beds of chalk admit of a more minute division. Those in the vicinity of Dover, described by Mr. Phillips, Geological Transactions, Volume 5, page 18, are separated by that gentleman into the following, that namely, 1. Chalk with numerous flints, 350 feet thick, which is subdivided into 1. A bed with few organic remains. 2. Chalk with interspersed flints, consisting chiefly of organic remains, in which numerous flints of peculiar forms are interspersed, and a few beds of flint. 2. Chalk with a few flints. This stratum is about 130 feet thick. 3. Chalk without flints, 140 feet thick, consisting of 1. A stratum containing very numerous and thin beds of organic remains, 90 feet thick. 2. A bed 50 feet thick, with few organic remains. 4. Gray chalk, estimated at 200 feet in thickness.